Welcome to episode 98 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah, and back with Tim again.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Peterson. It's good to see you guys. And today Isaiah and I are doing something wonderful again. We're gonna not have a guest, and we're gonna be focused on a topic and kind of bounce back and forth on some things, to get it all out there. But before we do that, I'm going to take a pause so we can insert our sponsor mentions, and then I'll throw it back to Isaiah and we can dive in. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. I hope that was enough time for our sponsors, but I did forget one thing. I forgot our shout outs.
I was going to say.
I almost forgot, so I don't want to forget that. So, I'm always talking with people and they're saying like, what's up? And I bring up the podcast and, often they'll just say, oh my God, I listened to that. Or they'll just come to me and say, did you know I'm listening to it? So one of those friends who I've known for a long time, Jared Kliegerman from Toronto, he has an agency called The Think Tank. He is a fan. He likes our podcast, as do folks who also work in his agency. So yay. So we've got a lot of Canadian fans now because we have a group of people in Montreal. We have a group of people in Toronto, and we have people in Ottawa. So I've been talking to people, lately up there. So hello, Canada. It's great to hear from you guys. Let's keep expanding our international excitement because we've got folks all over Northern Europe. We've got people in Australia. I'm happy to hear. We have somebody in Mexico and somebody in Costa Rica that I've heard from. So keep it coming. Keep it coming.
I mean, I think the international community in some of these places, they're ahead of the US and B2B. I mean, Canada, I feel like, is a good example of like I've talked to some companies in Canada. They seem pretty well-versed in B2B e-commerce. So obviously Shopify is based out of there, and I think that you have a decent Magento open source community there too. So
they are. I would agree with that. Actually, I think that there are pockets around the world, not just Canada, where people embrace B2B e-commerce a little earlier than a lot of folks I've worked with in the US. I'm not exactly sure what it was about the environment, the ecosystem of things that made that happen, but I think you're right. I think Canada was a little
Netherlands, we've got a lot of Netherlands folks.
Yep.
UK seems to be, one of the ones too that we see. So yeah, I think it could be a culture, if the culture is willing to buy online and they're kind of used to that, then that makes it easier for them to to roll it out. Could also be the fact that it's cold in Canada and people want to ship things and buy online and not go in person to, honestly, I think that might have something to do with it, to be honest.
They're all staying at home in their jammies, ordering things online all the time. That's what it must be. But I don't know. The other thing I would say is I'd call out to my friends in Asia, because I speak with people in Asia relatively frequently for work-related stuff, and I'm trying to get them to become listeners, but we'd love to hear from more of you. So if you're anywhere in Asia, Southeast Asia, anywhere, reach out, and I'd like to hear more about how B2B e-commerce is for you guys too.
Yeah, some of the Asian countries I think are pretty far along, maybe further along than the US. But yeah, to get into the topic, I think we just generated so much knowledge from our own, personal careers and the podcast itself, that I think we have a lot to offer, just kind of going back and forth without a guest on some of that knowledge to bring to everyone. So we wanted to kind of focus on the decision-making process to select software. I think that's a big one. You select, when do you select things? When do you decide, all right, we got to stick with what we have, or it's time to get something new, or add new stuff? And then how do you build around it? what teams you build, I think that's a big challenge for a lot of folks, right? And if you can get that right, then I feel like you really can get a good foundation going, and you can start to get the marketing and the other things going once you have that kind of foundation, right? So
no, you're
yeah.
right. I'm just going to put one thing in front of what you just said, because I agree with all of it. I think it goes back to a hot topic we always bring up here. It's sort of mindset, right? Because I feel like people in different stages of their development as a business, they may be thinking different things, but you've always got to have this open mindset about what is best for me now, and that I could change easily or adapt easily as I get bigger, right? As I have to scale, what can come, get ported in and out, so to speak, right? It's that I think is really important, because we don't want people ever to get stuck. They're stuck.
It's very true. Yeah. Like is QuickBooks kind of like it's probably not a good fit for a lot of large B2B, companies that, or even mid-size, right? So you need to kind of start planning for like, what are the systems that you can be on that can scale you for the next, 3 to 5, maybe 10 years, hopefully, right? So why don't we start with that? Why don't we start with, I think most B2B companies, whether they've been around for a long time, or even if they're relatively new, they need some sort of ERP system, right? Something that handles accounting, inventory. Theoretically, you could kind of split up these systems, but it generally seems to be one system that handles accounting and inventory, and maybe some elements of like warehouse management and whatnot. And the typical names in the industry, right? You have SAP, Business One, or different versions of that, NetSuite or Oracle. And NetSuite is the big one, and Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics. We were just talking about before this. And so I think that what I'm finding is interesting, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is that people look at ERP as like this thing that handles these functions, but they fail to kind of look at two things that I think are actually really important, is like the ecosystem around it, and who can I hire to help me with it? Because, a software is only a software if you can get people to use it well, and you need people to customize it. There's a whole ecosystem community aspect to these things, and I think that's kind of lost sometimes on folks in this decision. And then the second one is like, how well is it going to work for e-commerce, right? If your vision is to build a better customer experience, and you're stuck on this system that a lot of these systems were not very well built for APIs, right? They're not built for integrating, and then they get into the system and they're like, oh crap, now I can't get the data out of here or show the data to my customer, and I can't really do e-commerce very well.
Well, I think a core thing about what you're bringing up here is that, ERP, and I'll just say it out loud once, because a lot of people may not even know, ERP is enterprise resource planning, right?
Yeah.
ERP, it was invented, of course, before e-commerce, right? It's been around for a long time, and the reason it was created was to, take processes in one place and processes another, and maybe reduce some paperwork and connect the dots. And
basically the advent of computers, right, is pretty much probably around slightly after when people started getting like the early IBMs. I'm sure the first.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I always make jokes about like, oh, I'm the old guy and I have this experience. But one of my earlier jobs, I did mainframe programming at one point, believe it or not. So, and we'd get these giant printouts, those stacks of printouts that would come, and we'd have to get the ruler and go across on them and see what was happening, and then report it to the other department. But it's essentially, the short answer to this is that was actually an early ERP, because we're taking this stuff that's generated, behind the scenes between these computers, looking at it, telling the other department what they have to enter, but to answer what you were really talking about and bring this to closer to today, is that, a lot of people had a mindset because they had these things set up in a pre-internet way, or their business is older and they did all of these things in a pre-internet way, and they didn't account for it, and they kind of latched it on in maybe an awkward way, or it was set up separately, and then they think about how they connect it to their ERP. or something, right? Whatever the or something is, and it's not holistic, it's not organic, it's not thinking of the way
I think that's kind of one of the core problems, is that ERP is such a critical infrastructure for the vast majority of B2B companies, but also historically ERP companies have built their software not to be very integration friendly or community friendly, because the whole purpose of the ERP was to get everything into the system. And so it was this one system that kind of did everything for you. And some of them literally you could do HR, payroll, like everything, right? Theoretically, like, and some of these B2B companies mostly run off just the ERP system still today. But with e-commerce, pretty much with, I mean, there's really not, I will tell you right now, I mean, we've done, deep research in e-commerce. We've been doing e-commerce at Trellis, my main business for pretty much my whole career. And there is no e-com platform that has or ERP that has a good e-com platform, right? So now if you want to do B2B e-commerce, you either need to build some custom front end or go buy a solution like Adobe Commerce, Magento, BigCommerce, Shopify, whatever it may be, right? And now you have to integrate, right? Like, so now you have this integration problem. And if you're buying a software that's not good for integration, you can see like how this becomes a problem, right?
It becomes a problem very quickly, and we're going to get into the weeds, I'm sure, in pieces of this, but this is almost where I get these conversations with clients and folks I've been in-house with, right, where we're talking about how this all should work versus how it does work. And I think one of the big aha moments is that it hasn't necessarily been talked about openly, right? I think that's a big part of what's going on in a lot of companies, where you have these teams doing their thing and there is revenue flowing and there is business happening, but yet they have these parts of the puzzle that really need to be connected better. But those teams aren't forced to go into a room and they're not necessarily reminded of the advantages of going into a room together to solve this and to make it better, right? So there has to be that process. You have to have the process there to just raise what we're raising here too.
Well, I think when you're evaluating these solutions, obviously you want to make sure that the solution covers your core needs, and the less you have to customize it, the better. And it really is worth, I think, going through like a deep, in-depth selection for ERP, because it's such a core system. You don't want to change as little as often. And so I think there's two pieces. One, I think you got to modernize. I think that actually, I would argue it's one of the biggest problems in B2B e-commerce is that people want this new modern e-commerce thing, but then they're not willing to upgrade their ERP, and all the data that we need for e-commerce is stuck in this thing that doesn't have APIs. It's just like this old system, and it's going to make it really hard to be modern with B2B e-commerce. So I think it's one of the most important things to modernize early on in the digital transformation of B2B e-commerce. But I would be looking at not just the capabilities of the software, obviously the licensing, but the community around it, right? Like, do they have a marketplace of apps? Kind of like, I think Shopify does one of the best jobs of that.
Yep, great job.
Obviously not as B2B focused of a company as some of these other software, but is there a marketplace of apps? What's the agency like the partner, the value-added reseller network look like? How many of them are there? How easy is it going to be to find talent and people that can work on this software, right? I think that's just underestimated. People go with these like little weird niche things that no one's ever heard of, and then you can't hire anyone for it because no one knows it, right? Or it's
this is a classic issue, and we've talked about this on this podcast from a lot of different angles, and I understand the appeal of something that seems like the term people use is purpose built, right? It's like it's built for this tiny little niche in an industry and this little special thing. There is a certain appeal to that, but I'm going to just say this, and it may be controversial. It's almost always not the right answer. I'm going to just say it, and if our friends want to yell at me, they can DM me, but really, it's almost always the wrong answer, and the reason is part of what you just said. There's no community necessarily for these things that are very, targeted and purpose built. You're not going to have the talent out there that knows how to deal with it. And also, what happens if that purpose-built solution goes away, right? All of a sudden, you're
A lot of times they get bought, they get rolled up into someone else. They might stop maintaining that stuff. I mean, I know many B2B companies that are now on software that is not supported by the vendor. It's in maintenance mode, and their core software is literally not supported by the original software vendor.
I mean, people
think how crazy that is, right? Your business,
it's totally crazy. I mean, and it's funny and it's not funny, right? Because the thing is like, there used to be a site years ago after the dot-com bust in 2000, 2001, that was like a software and startup graveyard, right? It's like, here's all the thousands of businesses that no longer exist. And it was alarming, and it was a little bit funny because look, I was part of that company or this one. But it's also like proof why you have to really think about what your future is, because that happens in cycles. Businesses get bought, they disappear, they shut down, they can't make it. Things come and go. You've got to be able to be flexible. You got to be able to be adaptable. And your business is what needs to survive. You can't be worrying about whether the software you're using is going to survive, right? That's the important.
It's not something you should want to worry about. And I think that that's where, I would really think of, like, I think a lot of people, they think, I think there's a couple problems. One, I'm not sure the ownership is taking these decisions seriously enough, right? Some of this, I think, should come down from the owners and executives and people that care about the long-term future of the company. Because most likely, whoever's selling you the ERP software, whoever's going to implement it, probably you're not going to be, they might not even be the ones you're working with in 5 years.
Yeah.
So you might have a new vendor or new people in the company. So you want this community of people to choose from. And so I would really be looking at that community around the software, and how strong is the community? Does the community seem like it's growing? Is it dying? I mean, maybe even try and find people in the community to give you their honest feedback. Sometimes you need to go and dig deeper to get like honest community feedback from people that aren't selling you the software, because whoever's selling you the software is obviously going to try and make it sound like it's amazing, right? They're never going to be like, oh, our community is dying.
Well, but you're right. And again, it's always hard for me to I can't name names sometimes because it's too embarrassing for these clients for me to name them out loud on this show. But one of them, this is exactly what happened to them. I'll say 8 or 9 years ago, they got a software solution that was small time, but it fit. It made sense for them. That company went out of business. They changed gears and spent a lot of money, did something else. And for some reason, they were convinced to do like a non-cloud-based solution or whatever, right? This solution that they had. Well, that is ending. Right, that is ending. There's an end date to it, and now, so I think it's literally a 9-year period. I think is exactly right. They'll be on their third solution, having spent hundreds of thousands, if not low millions, to figure this all out. And they've got a
probably
business.
When you factor in all the change costs, it's millions, right? Like the people costs adapting, right? Because some of that's not
even just my fees might be millions. Who knows? Right? But it's in all seriousness, it's a situation you don't want to be in as a major business. This is a B2B concern. They've got a lot of different things to worry about, and yet this decision was made, business goes away. This decision was made, business makes bad decisions, and they have to end and move to something else. Third platform. Right? Third platform. I don't want 3 different platforms in 9 years. I just want to continue to upgrade whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's a really serious decision that you don't want to make. I mean, I from the research I've done, it seems to me like there's seven major guys. Let's talk about the SMB space, enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
There's, some really bespoke enterprise stuff, but majority of businesses are SMB.
Yep.
Even upper mid-market, you're probably, if you sell physical goods to businesses, I think it's likely you're going to fall into NetSuite by Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics, a great solution. Epicor has maybe a little more niche, but seems to have a decent
Sure.
distribution, manufacturing. Infor, another
Yep.
big player. I guess they're owned by the Koch brothers now, so I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I know. Good
uh,
luck, everyone.
yeah. SAP Business One. They do have the HANA. HANA seems like it's like big time. Most people probably aren't ready for HANA, but the SAP Business One
Yeah.
line is like more the mid-market, small business. And then Sage Intact, Sage
Sure.
Distribution, Sage Manufacturing. They have a good cloud solution. And then Acumatica is the other one. I think
Oh
that's
yeah, I always forget them too.
yeah, they've been doing pretty well in
Yeah.
cloud, right? It
Yep.
seems like they were early cloud adopters. Let me see, is that right? Acumatica, Sage, NetSuite, SAP Business One, Epicor, Infor, and Microsoft Dynamics. Those 7.
Okay.
What I've seen, those seem to be the leaders in the kind of the B2B e-commerce ERP space. And they all seem to have a decent community. Obviously, some are stronger than others.
No,
those,
I'd agree with I agree with
yeah,
this. Like there aren't you don't need to look really. I mean, maybe there's somebody we forgot or didn't mention here,
yeah,
right? Maybe, but you don't really need to go out there and say, "Let me find 24 things and
yeah,
evaluate them all." I don't think this is the right reason. It's not the right place to
yeah,
do that in your business. There's no reason to do that. Figure out which community makes sense. Look if there are similar businesses that are, like
yeah.
yours that are working with these folks, get some
Talk to them, see if, and maybe see if someone's willing to give you friendly information, or like a tangential company. Maybe the direct competitors might not want to share everything, but someone that's close, right? They might. I mean, some of these guys will just say, "Hey, here's how it's going. Here's what's good and
but
bad."
and I'll tell a personal story to illustrate this. From it was both B2B and B2C. I was in health and wellness, vitamins, nutritional supplements for years. I did a lot of this. One of the times I was working at a company called Bronson. They had a lot of B2B relationships, a lot of different things going on, wholesale selling, plus consumer sites. We were working on a variety of things. I called up competitors. I did call up competitors when we were looking to make some changes. And I said, look, we don't want to fail this way. You don't want us to fail this way, right? Maybe we'll compete, out in the marketplace, but what are you doing? Like, how does that work? What relationship do you have there? People are willing to talk about that stuff.
Yeah,
And, it's because sooner or later you'll jump ship and you'll be in one of the competitors anyway. So you got to treat people well, right?
for sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, so I think that those 7 have varying degrees of quality of ecosystems and developers you can work with, and some are more native to cloud than others. So I mean, look, there's always, like you said, there's always exceptions, but that's the thing, is I think once you start going outside of those 7, or maybe there's a couple that we missed that have decent ecosystems, you start to go into these more niche markets, and it's risky, right? You go into software markets that, are they going to exist? Are they going to get bought out? What's the future of them? So let's say I think that if you've got a good system there, that's the foundation. Honestly, I think people think B2B commerce, oh, it's e-com platform. I would actually argue it's your ERP's ability to integrate with e-com is the foundation.
I would agree with
That's
you.
the first you got to get that first, because what we can't show anything on e-com.
Well, and I'll say another way to support, and kind of add to what you're saying too, is that, this is kind of the special flavor of B2B, right? B2C can have multiple components. We all know that. That's why there are multi-channel, omni-channel, all these things people talk about. But B2B is the poster child for multi-channel, omni-channel. You
Yeah,
can't really do B2B without looking at it from many, many, many angles. Is there a distributor network? Are there marketplaces?
yeah,
Is the distributor network all online or offline or both? What types of clients do you have? Do you have one, individual clients? Are they all corporate clients? Like, what are they, right? All of these things, government clients, right? It's just so many different ways of dealing with this, but the ERP is such a critical core what happens in that business and how it attaches to other things is important.
Yeah. For sure, for sure. So let's say you've got that selection down and you're maybe
I've got it.
you're on
It's
the
ready.
modern, like whatever, 365 or Infor Cloud Suite or Sage Cloud, like Intact, I think is the cloud version. Whatever it may be. Let's say you've started to kind of solve that problem. Then I think the other key piece is obviously e-com platform, right?
Sure.
E-com platform, you know, I think it's kind of a similar story with even less major vendors, right? I think that you know, outside of, honestly, in my opinion, Salesforce, which is really expensive, so I think it kind of rules out most people, but it's an option. It's a large ecosystem.
It's fine. It works well, but it's pricey. I agree with that assessment. You know, there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, so you have Salesforce Commerce, you have, I think Adobe Commerce has still got it's a consolidating but still thriving ecosystem,
Sure.
big ecosystem. BigCommerce, I think, is one of our you know, favorites and growing ecosystem.
Me too.
And then Shopify, there's an argument where it can play in B2B, I think. So outside of those four, I think you're starting to get into some niche ecosystems, and you face the same kind of risk. Where are you going more custom, headless? You know, I mean, you have like Unilog and Optimizely, but you have these kind of smaller niche players. I mean, I know what's the other one that's making a big push?
SAP or no?
I think SAP is kind of dying.
They're kind of done.
The modern one, the headless one.
Why are we both blanking on it? You're right.
The cloud one. You
can look it up on Google if you want.
Yeah, it's the one that moved into the Magic Quadrant top 4 now.
I know. We'll remember it.
But even they have like kind of a limited community of partners and apps and things, right? So I think outside of the ones I just mentioned, you're kind of like already kind of like limited in terms of, you know, community around the platform, and it's something you got to be careful about. I mean, I know some people on, I'm not going to name which one it is, but it's not the bigger ones. And it is kind of dicey in terms of the future of the platform and the community around it, because
you know, I say this with love, and I really mean that, whoever's listening, right? I say this with love, but you know, I've had friends who work with Spryker, you know, who work with Callio, work with these little, you know, they're like little
communities, right?
And it's not like they're all doing fine, right? But it's also something you have to just have this complete you know, like awareness of what you're doing, right? When you choose to do something like that, if you are you are closing yourself off in some ways, right? Or in many ways, I'll say, because it means that you're never going to have the enormous community, the same pace of innovation, the same options to do different things. You know, maybe things will be fine, you know, and they'll work okay for you, and maybe that's all you want, but that's not the answer for most businesses.
Well, the problem, I mean, Spryker is a great example. It seems like they have some pretty good functionality around.
They do.
Yeah. But here's the problem, right? Is how many agencies have done more than one implementation, or 2 implementations, or 10?
There you go.
Right. And so are you the guinea pig with that agency, or their second implementation versus, you know, I've done hundreds on Shopify, BigCommerce, and Magento, right? Like at Trellis, right? And so we know what we're doing, right? And so you know, and we're not the only ones. You can go find another person that's done 100 on BigCommerce or Magento or Shopify, right? And so, you know, you have this kind of limited agency network, and then the app providers, the community. I mean, I talk to many app providers, tech partners. They're not even, they can barely invest in Shopify, BigCommerce, and Magento integrations, let alone like Spryker, right? Like, so you're going to have this like very limited kind of like extension app marketplace. And I think that's really underestimated, how important the app marketplace and the community, the core e-commerce platform, is only going to do part of what you need. It's the search add-on, you know, the Bloom Reaches add-on kind of the world.
It's loyalty. It's all this other stuff that people think about, right? It's whatever it is. There are all these things you might want to do. And you know, just again, I always like talking it through sometimes to just say, like, for our listeners here, like how this would work. But you know, right now I do a lot of consulting. If somebody approaches me and says, here's the platform I'm working with right now, or the one I want to go to, and it's something that's kind of quirky, right, or smaller, I immediately say to them, that may be an issue. You may love it, but it may be an issue. And the reason is everything that we've just outlined, right? The community, the apps, and all of this stuff. If I have a problem finding somebody to work for me on behalf of a client, I can't say automatically, oh, I have an X.
I'll give you a perfect example. I just talked to someone on Suite Commerce, right? Sounds great. Suite Commerce is on top of NetSuite.
Sure.
That's like the holy grail of B2B e-commerce, right?
Absolutely.
I get NetSuite and Suite Commerce, right? It sounds like it would be, right? It sounds like it would be.
Yep.
But I'll give you the example. They can't have payment methods because payment gateways don't want to invest in Suite Commerce.
Well, they don't.
Because why would you invest in Suite Commerce when you can invest in Shopify and you can invest in BigCommerce and you can invest in Magento or Adobe Commerce and Salesforce? And so as simple as just adding payment methods is like this monumental task.
Yep.
For these companies that, one I'm talking to is not like a huge company. It's a small business, decent small business. And it's like, if it's that hard just to add a payment gateway, imagine adding a reviews app or search functionality, all these add-ons that are incredible for the ecosystems, for Adobe Commerce, for BigCommerce, for Shopify, for somewhat for Salesforce, but outside of those guys, it may be a little WooCommerce, but WooCommerce is kind of it's a tough platform to scale on.
It is.
It's hard to get these vendors to invest in building apps for these guys, right? And so they're ending up spending so much time wrangling with this software that's hard to work on, where I told them, and they were actually not really doing much B2B. And I was like, I just asked them, if you were on Shopify or BigCommerce, let's just, we have to build the integration, or you need a Sligo for integration. Yes, you now have integration to deal with, but all the other benefits, it just felt like just massively outweighed the slight con of dealing with integration, right? And
Yep.
so it was kind of an easy pros cons list, because it was like 1,000 pros and like one con, which is integration, which has been pretty solved with things like Sligo, and there's other solutions. They're not the only integrations.
And I'll just throw this out there too. I've worked on apps, right? So I'm this guy who's done a lot of these weird different things. I can talk to this, right? I've worked on apps, and when you're working on something, you're going to say, where will it work first? Where should we test it first? You're going to try it maybe on 2 things or 3 things. You're not going to you're not going to try it out in 24 things. There are 48 things.
I mean, I'm an advisor to three like tech vendors for the e-com platforms. One, I'm an investor, and all 3 of them haven't even made it outside of have only made it to BigCommerce. And 2 of them haven't even 2 of them haven't even finished their BigCommerce integrations.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 of the 3 are only on Shopify, and only 1 has made it to BigCommerce, and then the other ones haven't even had time to get past that, right? Like it's a lot of work just to build one good integration or app for these platforms, and so you kind of end up with this very limit. And I think that's why I'm kind of bullish on the fact that I believe that the e-commerce platform landscape will consolidate.
Yeah,
we're going to see consolidation because of the economy, the high interest rate, this like crazy funding rounds, I think, are drying up, and some of these smaller players, I don't think they're going to be able to get through that.
Yeah, and I don't wish ill on any of these smaller companies. They're all trying to do something to make it, but from the manufacturer, brand, whatever B2B player side, right, where you're coming up with these different things that you need to do in order to get your business forward, the safer and smarter bet is to go where these big communities are, where you can know that there's going to be continuous development and all kinds of excitement and options for you, because you can ride that wave. That's another way to look at it. If you're trying to figure out, how am I eking out another % or 2 or 3 to my growth arc, it's part of it is going to be to say, wait a minute, we could be an early adopter of this that just got developed for Shopify or for BigCommerce, and our competitors can't do it, right?
Yeah,
that's a big piece of how you do this.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that Yeah, it's definitely risky to go with a non-major player. But there are weird exceptions. There are times we're actually going custom or kind of like a headless custom front end
Sure.
on top of like the composable mock alliance thing could make sense. But now you're talking about a more sophisticated infrastructure.
See, that's the thing too. I'd put the dividing line there. If your life is not so complicated, don't complicate it.
Yeah, or you don't want it to be, and you want to be more out of the box ERP, out of the box ecom. Try and pick some big communities. You can find a good integration partner, bring those together. Speaking of the other, so I think once you've made two long-term bets there, long-term ERP, long-term ecom platform, those are two. I think people also think about these things way too short term, and they give up too quickly. It's like, no, you need to make this bet and invest and improve. It should be like a 5-year bet at least, and you're improving on this platform over the next 5 years. And so those are like, to me, the core, right? If you can get those two down, then you can kind of build around that, right? You have front-facing ecom and back-end ERP.
Yep.
Then maybe you need PIM, product information management system. You don't have to.
Let's just, since we're doing this in this episode, I want to just bring this up again. We've talked, about PIM a number of episodes, and it's a great topic for people. Like, when do you need to really think?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think that a lot of people do it prematurely, or they just think they need it. They need it. When do you feel like it's the time? What would you kind of advise someone on?
I tell people if they have a relatively small product line or the innovation cycle is relatively long, meaning that they're not releasing all the time. There's not that much that they have to worry about or keep track of, right? Or a lot of companies, B2B, they have a specific, how do I put it? Specific ranges of products for different clients, right? And that becomes a big issue, and you have to get a PIM in earlier, because it's exclusive to this group versus that group versus.
Yeah, you need segmentation of catalog.
It gets complicated. So for those people, they need a PIM if they don't have it already.
Yeah.
But a lot of folks don't know quite what it is, and they think, oh, it's for product and I need it. But a lot of times, if you have 1,000 SKUs and they're just pretty straightforward and you're not developing new ones every day, you don't need a PIM.
I also think people need to understand a PIM isn't going to make your product data better.
No.
Making your product data better is going to make your product data better, meaning you need a process.
That's right.
To create the data, organize the data, create the taxonomies. It's actual work. Yeah. Maybe AI will make that better, but right now, generally, companies underestimate, there's work involved in this. And I think for companies, kind of the same answer that I have is that for companies that all they're trying to show is one catalog on a website, they're probably better off just using the e-commerce platform as right? Because you just have one catalog. It's going to have to live in the e-com platform anyways. What I think people don't realize is PIM introduces a new level of complexity, because now you need the PIM to integrate with the ERP and to integrate with the e-com platform. So if all it is just living in the e-com platform anyways, then it's not going to help you. But if, let's say you're selling on Amazon, you're selling on Walmart, you want to pass data down to your, if you're a manufacturer, I think if you're a manufacturer, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're a manufacturer, you probably want to send different data to different.
Yeah, the bigger and busier you are as a manufacturer, the more important it is. And I'm a big fan. I think it's necessary for a lot of businesses. I just don't want anyone who's too small or too early in their journey or whatever to bother with it. It's just something else to worry about if you don't need it.
If you're a manufacturer, you own the brand, you want to send your data down to your retailers and your partners. If you're a distributor, I think that's where it's more of a gray area, right? Because if you're a distributor, you just might want the product data to live in e-com, and that should be fine for a certain period of time until you kind of outgrow that, right?
Yep, I agree.
So PIM is something you'll need to consider at some point. iPaaS is also something you're going to need to consider. There's some point-to-point solutions, but
what's iPaaS, Isaiah? What is it?
Integration platform as a service.
I know.
Yeah, it's the most confusing acronym.
It is. I always think it's going to be something else, right?
Celigo, Workato. It's a software you're probably going to need to consider as you have more integrations. CRM is pretty common. I think with CRM, some companies that I see use the ERP, like Microsoft has a pretty good CRM. Some of the ERPs that don't have good CRM, so they might get a Salesforce or a HubSpot. I also think CRM can get over-engineered. Like a lot of companies, like, are you really ready for Salesforce? Because it's expensive to do it well, right? Or should they go with like HubSpot?
Oh, I know. I've been an admin of both Salesforce and HubSpot in different places and different, startups that I've been involved in. And
Yeah,
you don't really need either at first if you're relatively small and relatively smart and organized.
yeah,
If you're as you start to get bigger though, everything gets more complicated and confusing. It's really almost like the PIM conversation that we just had. It's like there's a point where it's like, well, where is that point for you when you have in-house and external salespeople all over the world, and you're doing what then you have to really keep an eye on it. You have to be
yeah.
organized. You have to know what's going on. But
Yeah, no, yeah. So, I mean, I think then you start to get into, you might have shipping software solutions, you might have like warehouse management. Some of the
logistics
guys,
becomes a big deal for people who are manufacturers, right? Because you're
yeah.
getting parts from different
This is
places
where it
around
gets kind of interesting is like, does it end up being part of the ERP or an add-on to the ERP, or is it a
the world.
separate software? I think
It could
it
be
becomes,
either, right?
yeah,
And as you know, I've seen both. I've seen a lot of weird solutions. There was one that was a proprietary like logistics solution that was attached onto this system for this ERP system. It was a Microsoft Dynamics ERP. And I just wanted them to throw away this proprietary thing and to do something else, even if it was with Microsoft, because it basically would always be the cause of their problems. Like there was an
yeah.
issue with it updating or
Well, that's the problem with these weird add-ons, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, then you also have like, do you get a separate order management solution? It could even be like a channel advisor or like a Linworks or a Fluent or Kibo, I think
I
is
like
an,
Kibo. I've always liked
yeah.
Kibo, but there are a whole bunch that are out there. But yeah, I like
But
that.
then you're kind of, it sort of ties back to ERP because order management, ERP, like you kind of have all these things that become redundant, right? Ecom is order management technically. The order management is order management, then you have ERP. And so you get into these gray areas and it becomes a much more complicated, I think, like architecture, software selection process. But I
Well,
think, yeah,
oh no, I mean, all I was going to add to that is you're right, right? And for me, I think I make up a lot of weird rules about this myself just to help clients. And I say, well, if you're a US based, when stuff is outside the country and it comes in, then it goes from here to here. This is the system that it goes into. Because, for example, when you're doing logistics and you're getting parts manufactured all over the world, it's a real pain in the butt to track and to keep, know where everything is and what's happening. But then when it gets to certain places, it's like, all right, that's the flag that goes up. It means something else starts to happen, because I feel like if it carries through all the way, then I'm going to have even more problems in some of these systems that these
yeah.
people set up.
Well, I think that the complicated thing here is now you have, you might have a few core systems, these add-ons, all of a sudden you can easily end up with 10, 20, way more than that pieces of software. Now you need integration, right? Now you need
Yep.
iPaaS, going back to that integration software. But I think integration and this ecosystem of software working together, that's really underestimated. I think that's where
Mhm.
people they end up with kind of this mess and there's no like kind of thought of how everything's going to work together and kind of drive the business forward. And that's what needs to happen to really do B2B commerce well, because it is kind of like a mix of all these software at some point.
So I'm going to throw something out there. And again, I think I know where you land on this, but for our listeners, right? So who is doing all of this internally at a business, right? Because, a lot of businesses evolved and they have IT teams and they have e-commerce teams, and they have all of this. So who's working with iPaaS and the logistics solutions? And, like, how do you do that in a
Well,
company,
I
right?
think this is where where I've seen companies get way too siloed. I talked to one and they're like, oh, IT deals with that. But
Yep.
then the ecom guy is responsible for ecom, but he doesn't get to make any IT decisions.
Yep.
The IT decisions affect the success of ecom. And so, I think you need this kind of like collaboration between IT, marketing, e-com is kind of its own function, product data, customer service, warehouse, shipping and logistics, operations, right? I mean, really, it's like e-commerce is everything, right? It's operations, it's IT, it's marketing, it's a little bit of sales. He was saying that they really struggle to get the sales reps on board with e-com, the older sales reps. And he actually, this is a conversation I had with a e-com manager. Newer sales reps had higher e-com numbers.
Yeah,
that was just because they were more used to it. And ones that have been there for 20 years were like, they're just, the numbers are lower because they're just like, they don't do it. They're not used to getting people on the website, you know?
Oh yeah, but you know the collaborative piece, you know, the cooperative piece that you mentioned is the first part of what you just said there is, you know, again, it's something I'm a big fan of talking about with businesses. I love scaring people in a way. I know it sounds really weird, like I don't know what it says about me, but I'll go in and I'll say like, well, who's doing all of that? Like who is responsible for each of these areas and how much do they talk, right? And I'll just start saying this and then everyone gets nervous. It's like, well, you're right. We don't really talk.
Yeah.
And then you just
IT never talks to marketing. And
you
I mean,
know,
that's the other thing. I think marketing is getting so technical, it bleeds
it
so
is.
much more into IT. I mean, yeah, definitely.
You know,
So
my first marketing jobs had no tech, basically. I remember I was a VP of marketing at a health and wellness company like 20 years ago, right? And what happened was we hired somebody that was called like the MarTech person. You know, that was like their job was to
yeah,
figure out tech as it applied to marketing. But within, I'd say 5 years of that, everybody who came into marketing and everybody who was already in marketing figured out they better start learning tech, right? Like which of these things
there's a
applies?
spectrum. I mean, I see two problems on both sides. There's a balance, right? The marketing people are in over their head and they're struggling with the tech part of the marketing and the development and, you know, the things that are technical. And then you have the IT people that are just so out of touch with marketing. They're trying to do everything as like functionality, and there's no brand and marketing strategy with the roadmap. And you kind of get these like dichotomies of clients that are either very marketing heavy, but don't get the tech and struggle with the tech and get frustrated because things don't always work as they expect, or they think everything's easy, right? Because it's not. And then you have the IT people who they really get the tech and they can be good to add features, but like everything is features and functionality, and there's like no kind of like marketing strategy behind the vision of the e-com, right? E-commerce and the business. And
I
so
mean,
there's generally, I find, rarely do I find a good balance between the two. I rarely see that, you know?
it's rare. I have to say the nice thing though, and I really believe this, I think unless I'm going to say COVID helped, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And then just prior to COVID, I think people were asking a lot more of these questions internally, but it's still not where it should be. But I think it's better. I do see people get together more often now when I come in for, you know, engagements at different companies of
Yeah.
all sorts. It's more often, but it's still not there. You know, it's still not where the
I
idea.
think it's on the executives to get their shit together and start to bridge these gaps and get the divisions talking to each other. I mean, something I've had to do is just get better interdepartment, you know, collaboration going.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, right? Because honestly, IT personalities are very different than marketing personalities. They're very different from salespeople personalities, from the operations people. It's a hard job. And I think it's the CEO's job to kind of like bring these personalities together and get them to work together, you
It
know?
is. And that's also something I'm happy to say I've seen a change in. I think that CEOs in recent years, the ones that I've worked with, you know, closely, they are more savvy and they are more aware that people have to talk, and you know, they are, you know, more interested in not having silos in their business because they see the advantages of that. It's still, again, there's always a like a hurdle, right? And there's always time that has to pass, but I feel like there's progress, and that makes me feel pretty good actually to go in, and it's not a CEO who's like the
I
old-fashioned.
totally agree. I mean, I had a conversation with a pretty large distributor, and it was pretty exciting to see that the CEO was like invested in it, and he
Yep.
was with his IT guy there, talk like he's very much like in the process. And I feel like, 5-10 years ago, or even 3 years ago, you wouldn't have, and this is a 600-person company, probably wouldn't have the CEO as invested in those conversations with B2B commerce.
Oh, yeah, there's a company that I had worked with some years ago that is evolved in a lot of ways, but they do a lot of analytics. I'll just leave it at that. They do lots and lots of analytics. And, the CEOs over those years have really changed dramatically. They used to be much more kind of boardroom sort of people, is the way I always describe it. Where they were worried about the big financing and stuff behind the scenes like that, which is important, but today that's not it. The CEOs they've had more recently are much more like aware. They're in those meetings. They can actually contribute.
Well, I think the best example is Elon Musk. I know he gets a lot of negative press and whatnot, but like what I'll say, I think he does well is he's just like very much in the weeds as a CEO, probably more so than you'd expect from a Fortune 500 CEO. And
and that's something
like in the manufacturing floor on Tesla. Like he'll like go to the
No, and that I won't even go into all of the stuff about Mr. Russ, but that part, I have to say, I agree with you completely. I like that part, where he's aware, he knows how to talk about this stuff to people. You cannot be a CEO of a company successfully anymore. And this is I mean this 100%. If you don't have some sense of what people are actually doing that drives the revenue of that business. If you don't have some
read
sense
that the Costco CEO went to like every store.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I heard that too.
Or like per year, something crazy like that. Like every year he would go to like every store or something.
Well, and the new Starbucks CEO is a barista every month. He goes into different locations and he's making drinks. So I like that. It's not just like being a showboater, just like.
I think the Uber CEO did the same thing. I think the Uber CEO was driving, or he was doing some driving himself.
And why not? Because, then you can actually say, well, when I took a passenger, or when I made the coffee, it really has a resonance. And that's all totally relevant to what we're talking about here. You got to be in the weeds to an extent.
I think that if I was to give a takeaway from this podcast, is that the CEO should understand the importance of the selection of their core software, ERP, e-com platform. Maybe some of the other big ones, CRM, iPass, like the 5 or 10 big ones that really impact the business in B2B commerce. They should be involved in the decision and care about the decision and know enough about what's going on to help make the decision, because they have like the CEO hat on of financials and what they can afford. And sometimes if you leave it up to IT, they're going to go with the cheapest solution, because IT is like, how do we save money? And you know what I mean? Like some of you've seen that, right? Where IT's like, how do we get licensing costs to the lowest number? That's not always a great way to select software, right? Like it's better to go with value. A CEO should understand value and go with like the better software that's going to scale for the next 10 years. So they don't go with that cheap bespoke software that you said that makes them go to 3 different. I see a lot of penny wise, pound foolish. If there's one thing I could summarize B2B e-commerce companies, is they're penny wise, pound foolish. They pinch the pennies and then they lose the pounds or the dollars, or the famous saying, because they selected the cheap software, the cheap vendor, and then they have to do it all over again. Or never.
That's and this is one of the reasons I love doing our podcast, right? Because we're bringing up kind of different aspects of the same thing, and we're basically in 100% agreement on this stuff. I mean, there's something that we both see here, and it really is that it's not just the CEO even, right? It's like the whole C-suite, and however company leadership is structured, they've got to understand what they're up to. And it's not just the idea like, oh, the budget is $222,000. It's like, well, what does that tell me? Like the budget,
or why is,
what are your goals?
I think these budgets need to be questioned.
Yeah, right? Well,
they come up with a number and they're like, that's it. And it's like, it could be like a big $300 million company, but they have this like strict budget. And it's like, why? Or what's that going to get you? Or is it going to get you halfway there? Like, are there other things that you can do to free up budget to do it right? I think that a lot of companies don't think, what is the budget I need to do this right, and do it right the first time, and not have this kind of half-baked, kind of crappy solution, which I think a lot of people end up with,
one of the and this is a situation that's occurred over and over for me. I'll come into a meeting where, there's already an interest level in doing something. It's a replatforming, it's a transformation project, whatever it is, right? There's an interest level. If somebody in that meeting is that, says, our budget is this amount and it must complete in like 6 months and 2 days, and it's like, where is that coming from? Who made that decision? I immediately am like ready to not enrage, but I'm like, guys, like, why are you doing that?
Told this person who told this person, and it's like, it's so disconnected from what might actually be important to the business, right?
Of course, because then we have to say, like, well, how much money are you going to be getting out of this investment, and how quickly? And then, okay, so therefore we can spend more money.
I don't even think these companies should be coming up with budgets until they've done significant research, or maybe even paid someone to help them come up with a budget, right? Like, don't even, if you're not deep into this and really experienced, you shouldn't even have a budget yet. You should be like, all right, let's talk to vendors, let's get quotes, let's get the high, medium, large. A lot of people, they go and get all the lowest quotes they can to fit the budget. It's like, yeah, you're gonna go get these crappy offshore low budget quotes because that's what it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, you kind of like went out with these low numbers and you're gonna go find those low-end vendors to hit those numbers.
And once you learn all of this stuff, right, the stuff that we're talking about here, it can give you the confidence to say, let's not talk about that number right now. You raise your hand in that meeting and say, that's not the point right now. What are we trying to accomplish? Who have we talked to? What are the best solutions? Okay, our budget is X. Let's use that here for phase one. And then, it really has to be that kind of conversation, because you can't close a door too early, because it's just going to hurt you in the end. You can't say, I only have X and this must be done. It's like, well, how did you make that decision and why? Right. So I understand. I completely understand.
Well, we'll definitely be doing more of these. I think we're at the hour. I've already got ideas for the next one, but I think hopefully this helped people really think about why, the software they're choosing. It's not just a license, right? It's a license plus a community plus, people to run. I think that's a big part of the mistake, is you got to run the software. Someone has to run the software, customize the software. Like, it's very rare that you just only use the out-of-the-box features and that's it.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you on this. And then what I also would remind people is this is episode 98, right? So we're coming up on 100. We're looking to do some special things for 100 and 101. And we're also going to be live at Digital Commerce today. Is it September 6th? What's the date? Do you have it, Isaiah?
Yep, September 6th.
September 6th.
So we're not changing it this time.
No, I want to make sure I had the right one. September 6th in Boston, Digital Commerce today. All of our listeners from around the world should come. Why not? Right? So just look it up, reach out to us if you can't find it, and we're going to see you live there.
Very exciting.
Yep.
All right, we'll be back soon for another episode.
All right, that's fantastic. Have a good one, Isaiah.
You too. Bye.